They say the tool was a grotesque parody of a mother's embrace, an iron mockery of the very source of life. Forged in the fires of misogyny and religious fervor, it was designed not just to inflict pain, but to annihilate a woman's identity, her femininity, her place in the world. In the dark, fetid chambers of medieval dungeons and the public squares of zealous towns, this instrument of targeted cruelty became a symbol of a society's deep-seated fear and hatred of women. When its cold, sharp talons were brought to bear, they didn't just tear at flesh, they shredded the fabric of womanhood itself. This is the story of the breast ripper, a torture device so brutally specific that its very existence speaks to a particular kind of patriarchal terror. It is the story of countless unnamed women accused adulteresses, so-called heretics, and suspected witches whose bodies were made the battleground for a war on female autonomy. It is the story of how institutions, convinced of their own moral purity, could devise instruments of such profound engendered violence. And it is the story of how this one horrifying artifact reveals a dark and persistent thread of misogyny woven into the history of justice, a legacy that still casts a long shadow today. The period is the late Middle Ages, stretching into the early modern era. Europe is a continent in turmoil, gripped by religious upheaval, social anxiety, and a burgeoning obsession with sin and demonic influence. It is within this crucible of fear that the machinery of persecution is refined and expanded. While torture has been a tool of interrogation and punishment for centuries, this era sees the development of devices with a horrifying new level of specificity designed to punish particular sins in ways that were both physically excruciating and symbolically potent. And for women, the punishments were often uniquely, sadistically tailored to their bodies. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the grim world of medieval gender-based torture. In this landscape of institutionalized cruelty, the female body was seen as a source of temptation, a vessel of sin, and a gateway for demonic corruption. The very aspects of womanhood that were tied to life, sexuality, and independence were twisted into marks of guilt. It was not enough to punish a woman for her alleged crimes. The punishment itself had to be a statement, a violent sermon carved into her flesh, reinforcing a patriarchal order that viewed female power as an existential threat. This is the world that gave birth to the breast ripper, also known with chilling directness as the iron spider or simply the tearing claws. The design was brutally simple and horrifically effective. Typically, it consisted of 2, 3, or 4 heavy iron prongs curved into sharp talon-like claws. These claws were joined at a handle operating on a pincer or scissor-like mechanism. The device was made to be clamped onto a woman's breast, the sharp points digging deep into the tissue. Once affixed, interrogators or executioners would apply force, either by pulling away from the body with brutal strength or by using a screw mechanism to slowly and inexorably tighten the claw's grip. The purpose was singular and unambiguous: to mutilate and tear the breast tissue, often ripping it completely from the chest wall. This was not a tool of general application. It was an instrument specifically and exclusively designed to punish women. Its form was a direct and vicious attack on the female anatomy, a clear manifestation of a system that sought to control and dominate women by targeting the very symbols of their femininity. In an age where a woman's value was often tied to her roles as a wife and mother, the destruction of her breasts was a profound act of social and psychological annihilation. It was a punishment that went far beyond physical pain, striking at the core of her identity and her perceived purpose within society. The breast ripper was employed against women accused of a specific range of female crimes. Chief among them was adultery. For a woman who had transgressed the strict boundaries of marital fidelity, the tearing of her breasts was a symbolic retribution, a violent punishment for her perceived sexual deviancy. It was also used against women who had committed infanticide or induced an abortion, turning the source of maternal nurturing into a site of grotesque punishment. In the eyes of the inquisitors and magistrates, this was a form of brutal, symbolic justice, aligning the punishment directly with the nature of the supposed sin. But its use was not limited to sexual transgressions. The device found a prominent place in the persecution of heresy and witchcraft. Women who dared to challenge religious orthodoxy, who practiced folk medicine, or who were simply outsiders in their communities, could find themselves accused of being in league with the devil. For these women, the breast ripper became part of the arsenal used to extract confessions. The agonizing pain was a tool to break their will, to force them to admit to consorting with demons, attending Sabbaths, and casting malevolent spells. The mutilations served as a public warning to other women who might stray from the path of piety and obedience. To maximize the agony and the terror, the iron claws were often heated until they glowed red-hot. When the scorching metal was applied to the flesh, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The heat would sear the skin and cauterize the tissue, even as the sharp points tore through it, creating a multi-layered assault of burning and ripping pain. The smell of burning flesh would have filled the chamber, adding another sensory dimension to the horror. This added element of heat was not just for pain, it was also a tool of psychological warfare. A terrifying spectacle designed to break the victim's spirit before the physical tearing even began. The sight of the glowing hot instrument alone was often enough to elicit a confession, whether true or not. The breast ripper became a terrifyingly common feature during the great European witch hunts that swept across the continent from the 15th to the 18th centuries, in the fevered imagination of witchfinders like Heinrich Kramer, the author of the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. Women were inherently more susceptible to the temptations of the devil. Their bodies, their sexuality, and their knowledge, especially midwives and healers, were viewed with deep suspicion. In this context, the breast ripper was not just a torture device, it was a theological instrument, a tool for purging the perceived demonic taint from the female form. For the few who survived this ordeal, the consequences were lifelong. Disfigurement was not a side effect. It was the point. Survivors were left with horrific, gaping wounds and permanent, jagged scars that served as a constant, visible reminder of their punishment. They were branded, marked for life as women who had transgressed. In a society that placed immense value on a woman's physical wholeness, especially for marriage and childbirth, this mutilation was a sentence of social death. The scars ensured they would be ostracized, unable to marry, and forever marked as outcasts. The psychological trauma, the enduring pain, and the social isolation were punishments that continued long after the physical wounds had closed. Ultimately, the breast ripper symbolized the absolute control that patriarchal institutions, the church, the state, the communities sought to exert over women's bodies. It was the physical manifestation of an ideology that viewed female autonomy as a danger that must be violently suppressed. By targeting the breasts, the device attacked a woman's sexuality, her maternal potential, and her very physical identity. It was a brutal declaration that her body was not her own. It belonged to her husband, to the church, to the state, and it could be marked, mutilated, and destroyed as a warning to all other women. This horrifying device was part of a larger gender-specific torture arsenal, alongside instruments like the scold's bridle, used to silence outspoken women, and the vaginal pear, designed for internal mutilation. The breast ripper formed a suite of tools created with the female body specifically in mind. This specialization reveals the deeply ingrained nature of misogyny within the justice systems of the time. It shows a conscious and deliberate effort to create punishments that were not just painful, but also deeply humiliating and symbolically tailored to dismantle a woman's sense of self. Today, replicas and surviving examples of the breast ripper are displayed in torture museums across Europe and around the world. They sit in glass cases. Their cold iron forms a chilling testament to a brutal past. Tourists gaze upon them with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. But these artifacts are more than just gruesome curiosities. They are vital historical documents. They are physical evidence of a time when gender was not just a social construct, but a justification for specific and unspeakable forms of violence. They force us to confront the uncomfortable reality of how deeply misogyny can be embedded within systems of power and justice. The story of the breast ripper, therefore, is not merely a tale from a distant barbaric past. It represents the dark and enduring history of misogyny in the administration of justice. It serves as a stark reminder of the horrific consequences that arise when one group is systematically dehumanized and their bodies are turned into objects of control and punishment. The cold, silent claws of the iron spider are a testament to the fact that the fight for a woman's right to control her own body and to be seen as a full and equal human being is a battle against long and violent history, a history whose echoes we must never be allowed to forget. For in its jagged iron teeth, we see the face of a hatred that we must always be vigilant against, lest its shadow fall upon us once more.